Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the new news. My name is Paul, and it's a pretty busy day today. There's a lot of stuff obviously going on. Russia was a little bit quiet today when it comes to our sources, which is a little bit weird, but there is still a ton of stuff going on. There's been a lot of announcements made by different government agencies in Ukraine. There's been a lot of stuff that's been going on regarding the situation in Iraq, and there is just a whole lot of news today. A lot of this stuff, unfortunately, though, just is not very good. A lot of this stuff is just pretty terrible in its own right. You're talking about global famine. You're talking about droughts. You're talking about conflicts, whether that's counterterrorism operations, or you're talking terrorist attacks, or especially the war in Ukraine. So please make sure to check out the video description below, because in that video description there are a ton of links down there for different organizations all across the globe, and we're always looking for more. So if you have any more, please join us on our Discord. That link is also in the description, and please let us know if you have any other organizations. We're currently looking through vetting several of them that we received both today and over the past few days, and we're also looking for trying to get others for different areas that we don't have currently, whether you're talking about Brazil, where they just had those major floods, or you're talking about Mexico, where there's been a lot of where they just had those huge hurricanes that came through, and also places like Durban, South Africa, which had major flooding, and of course more for Ethiopia, Somalia, and if we could, the Middle East. Well, I know that one is a little bit more difficult, but if you can't give a lot to these organizations, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, trust me, I understand. Give us a like and subscribe, and let your friends know about us, because one, I would like to see more people, of course, that come here and enjoy the news from an independent source, but more so, the more people that are here, the more good we can do in the world overall. And that's really what this is here for. We're never going to have super chats. We're never going to be pushing any kind of merchandise or anything. No, we are constantly going to be on topic, and we're constantly going to be doing these fundraisers and having that stuff in the description and on our Discord and all of that. So that's what we're here for. We're all volunteering here. I mean, I have a full-time job, so I'm not looking for the money. So anyway, with that being said, we're going to go ahead and dive right into Ukraine. We're actually going to dive immediately in on the topic of the day, and that really is that the damage in Ukraine has reached $104 billion. This is according to Denis Shmyhal, who is the Prime Minister of Ukraine. And this is the quote. Since the beginning of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, the sum of infrastructure damages to Ukraine has already reached $104 billion. Russian troops have either destroyed or damaged at least 45 million square meters of housing, 656 hospitals, more than 1,200 educational establishments, and nearly 25,000 kilometers of road, 300 bridges, and 12 airports. That, right there, is a ton of infrastructure that's been destroyed. A ton of civilian infrastructure that's absolutely destroyed. Now, when you're talking about $104 billion, that's a substantial amount of damage. And that's really been the theme of the day, is there's been a ton of infrastructure damage today. And we're going to get to that here in a little bit. But we've seen the toll that this war has taken on places like Mariupol, Rubizhne. You've seen it up here around Kyiv, Irpin, Bucha, Hostomel, Berodyanka. The list goes on and on and on, and many settlements that we don't even cover here that have just been completely wiped off the face of the earth. There isn't a settlement there anymore. Many of these villages, especially once you get into the Donbass, aren't especially large. Many of them are rather small. Many of them are more like communes, and many of them are gone. They're just not there. You really have to zoom in. Sometimes when I'm looking around the map, I'm seeing, hey, okay, what's going on around here? Is there obviously damage from the war prior to this, and obviously, unfortunately, a lot of these places just don't even have a name anymore. So that is the situation regarding infrastructure across the country. There's more news as well. There was a new prisoner exchange, however. So this is coming from the Defense Intelligence of the Ministry of Defense. And this, their quote today is, in exchange for prisoners between Ukraine and Russia has taken place. 5 Ukrainian citizens have been returned home. Additionally, more American aid did arrive today inside of Ukraine. So this is according to the Ministry of Health in Ukraine. The U.S. government has transferred 16,500 tons of oncology drugs to Ukrainian hospitals as part of a new humanitarian aid package. So this is part of that stuff that we were talking about the other day when we brought up some of the tweets from the embassy in Kyiv, the U.S. Embassy to Kyiv, and also from USAID, which is the government agency that facilitates humanitarian aid for the U.S. government. So that's kind of what we're seeing here. A lot of aid pouring into the country, a ton of it. There, all of the different independent organizations, but governments as well, have been putting in a ton of aid in and around the country. Unfortunately, some of it has not been able to reach where it needs to. But that's just a result of the war at this point, and really the Russians just not being willing to allow a lot of humanitarian aid into places such as Mariupol. And on a somber note today, here in Kyiv, this is right on Independence Square, also known as the Maidan Square. And there's mourning that happened today there. So Ukrainian activist and soldier Roman Yatsushny, who was basically his protests on Maidan Square back in 2014, sparked the Maidan Revolution. He was part of the students there that were beat by the militia police inside of Maidan Square, and that really sparked the revolution. And he was killed in action up by Izium roughly 2 days ago. Today he was laid to rest, and there was a ceremony of mourning here, right there on Independence Square in Kyiv. We have a couple of different things coming out from this. Hundreds of people showed up for this. Hundreds of people. I mean, he was a very major activist. I mean, he has always been very vocal about this. He was protesting originally. He was protesting developments that were being made by the Ukrainian government in 2014 that were essentially illegal developments, illegal construction projects, like a ski resort inside the city. So, but here we have the video. Take a look. And from there, we continue on, and we end up going over into the Donbass. And so we jump over here into Severodonetsk, where there was a pretty massive explosion in Severodonetsk. Actually, we can take a look at this picture here. So what this is, actually it's a short video, so we'll take a listen. So what this appears to be is actually, so we know before that that Ukrainian forces in and around the areas of Rubizhne and Severodonetsk have witnessed, and we've seen photos of this, and we showed them on the channel, where nitric acid tanks have been hit by the Russians. And normally what happens when that occurs is you get this very large smoke cloud, first of all, that rises up from when these are hit. But the distinction between this and most smoke clouds we're seeing throughout the war is that very vibrant orange smoke that happens whenever one of these is hit, and also settles across the region as it's blown blown with the wind. In fact, the LPR and DNR troops that were in the area of Rubizhne, just prior to the beginning of the Donbass offensive, Russian forces hit a nitric acid tank up there, and the commanders were actually complaining to some Russian media, including RT and TASS and RIA, about the fact that their troops were starting to get really sick because of all this orange stuff that was falling down around them, because the wind shifted and it blew it over their lines. So This wouldn't be the first time, and while we can't confirm that a nitric acid tank was hit, Ukrainian forces have said there was a large fire and there was a large explosion in the town. The visual indicators are all there to say it did. Now, I did just get a comment in just a minute ago from Xenocide21 who was asking about the ceremonial unit that was here in Kyiv, and he asked like, what's with the red armband? So take a look here. Actually, I think it might have been one of the pictures. Yes. So why the red armbands? Well, the red armband. It's first of all, this is a ceremonial unit. That's why they're wearing all these red bands. But that red and gold is actually the colors of the army of Ukraine, the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. In fact, you can see it right here on their flag that they're carrying. So that's kind of what you're seeing here. Now, I don't know too much specifics about it past that, just because I'm not in the Ukrainian armed forces. Most armed forces designate their ceremonial units in a certain way, and this just may be the way that they're doing it, considering they're in camouflage uniform and not dress uniform. So other than that, I can't speak intelligently enough on the situation, so I can't tell you why specifically, but that appears to be the reason. As we continue over here near Severodonetsk, we can see just outside the city, heavy fighting is continuing. So the heavy fighting of Severodonetsk is continuing. We do not know what advances have been made and what have not. So just for lack of visual evidence, we haven't moved this battle line really since the last time we announced it. And at this point, Russian forces are still fighting very fiercely against the Ukrainians. And there's been apparently a buildup of Russian forces as well. They're still using high-level amounts of saturation bombardments using the BM-21 Grad system on the city of Severodonetsk, really turning it into what would look like the beginning of the Battle of Mariupol, basically 2.0. And the thing is that here in the Luhansk region alone, Russian forces are reportedly, at least according to the Ukrainian armed forces, are actually attempting to take the Luhansk region along 9 different axes of advance. So in order to prevent them from becoming encircled, there is a lot of fighting all across the Luhansk region to keep the Russians at bay and keep really the focus on Severodonetsk and not become encircled, losing thousands of troops in the process, because that is essentially what would happen. It would be the Azovstal on a much larger scale. So that's currently what we're seeing, and we're seeing Ukrainian forces conducting combat patrols and setting up landmines and claymore mines all throughout this region as they're trying to prevent. First of all, they're trying to make contact with Russian forces and engage them, and also they're trying to prevent the movement of Russian forces throughout some of these regions. So let's go ahead and take a look. So this first one is coming out of Severodonetsk. This is just some Ukrainian troops out here on patrol. There is no sound to this one. This appears to be on towards the outskirts of the city. You can see it's a lot more sparsely. Not as much infrastructure out and about as you would see in downtown. Really much more open warfare. Open warfare when it comes to an urbanized setting. A lot more long distance engagements. And that's just a result of how metropolitan areas spread out. But this would be much more akin to fighting up near Bucha, Irpin, Hostomel, except a little bit less wood lines, but still that similar type of rather open city planning, kind of urbanized warfare. We can see another one of Ukrainian forces out here, and they are just out and about, walking through some of these wood lines. We can see that one of them has a service dog with them. He's got to cross that danger area. Roads are danger areas, by the way, in a military context, because it's a long straightaway where people can shoot at you. But we can see they seem to be setting up here. So just a lot of patrols, a lot of security and combat patrols ongoing. But that is the situation in and around Donetsk. Not any heavy combat footage today, unfortunately, guys. I know that's what a lot of people come here to do, but yeah, that's a lot of very intimate stuff when you're talking about that footage. So that's just the ball game. Most of the guys don't really want to share that. As we move over here to Lysychansk, so according to Sergei Haida, the head of the Luhansk Regional Military Administration, the Russian invaders pulled up all the reserves. We are waiting for a big offensive in the Luhansk region in the coming days. So that means that, so what he is saying is, according to the intelligence that he is getting, Russian forces have pulled in all of their reserve forces that they were holding back purposefully, which is a very common thing to do. You keep troops in reserve. But they have pulled all of their reserve forces. They are now mobilizing them, and they're getting ready to try and, it sounds like, sweep the Luhansk region finally in one go. Now that they feel that they have the momentum. So we will have to see how that plays out as a result. If it is in the coming days, we will see a very large increase in fighting in and around Donetsk, Lysychansk, and the rest of the Luhansk region. But Luhansk really is probably a major goal for the Russians, because it's something that is much more achievable than some of the other regions within Ukraine, just because most of the Luhansk region was already under the control of the separatist forces, and now with the Russian forces that have even closed that even further at this point, this is really all that's left. This right here is the border of the Luhansk region. You can see there's not a whole lot left. So if they can secure the entire of the Luhansk region and just hold that line, they can say they've taken part of the Donbass and just have to redouble their efforts over into the Danets Oblast, which would be next, and likely that would probably lead them over to Slavyansk, where we know that they are already pushing up from Lyman and Izium, but also Kramatorsk, because Kramatorsk is a major convergence of roadways and road networks throughout Ukraine. Really is a major point in moving supplies and equipment and troops throughout the Donbass, and also is a major city within the Donetsk Oblast. So we'll have to see how that goes, but yeah, I don't really know what else to add on to that at this point. As we jump down here, as we jump over here, got ahead of myself, guys. No mourning in peace within Lysychansk. So this is a woman who the Ukrainian troops, her husband had been killed in action here locally, and the Ukrainian troops were showing her where they had buried him. And this is all in Lysychansk while it's under bombardment. Take a look.
Оно должно было сохраниться.
Вот это.
Я тебя нашла. Прости меня, прости. Обязательно выполню то, что обещала. Я только для этого выживу. Прости, что ушла.
Давай. Что приедешь сюда? Я тебе обещал.
Obviously not a good situation any way you want to cut it. Now, someone did say that there was apparently an Mi-24 that got shut down. Now, we did see an Mi-24 that was shot down, I believe it was yesterday, by Ukrainian forces in the Zaporizhzhia Oblast. That has been reported in other locations as well as taking place in other locations. Some people have even said it was over in the Donetsk. We know from the Azov battalion or from the Azov regiment and from the Ministry of Defense, it was over in the Zaporizhzhia Oblast. It took place yesterday. It was very low flying. They struck it. Its engine went out. It turned onto its side and landed just across a row of trees and into a field. Now, there is a lot of Russian aircraft being shot down. A lot of them we probably haven't even seen or heard of. And that's just because not everyone has their camera going when they shoot one of these things down. But the Russian Air Forces and the who are in the VDV, who operates a pretty large helicopter fleet, have taken pretty substantial losses. And we can see that in how they're flying. They're flying a lot of nap of the earth flight, which means they're weaving in and out of trees and power lines and stuff. They're keeping extremely low. They will pop up, and they're actually doing a high angle of fire with their rockets. This gives them more range for their rockets and really keeps them at a standoff distance and minimizes how much time they're exposed to enemy ground fire, especially these man pads that are really keeping the skies of Ukraine open and contested. You're seeing the very similar situation when it comes to the actual fixed-wing fighter aircraft as well. We saw an Su-25 actually end up crashing and burning. Yeah, in a green field. That looked familiar. Yes. So we saw it crashing, and we saw a Su-25 actually crash over near Belgorod, and they reportedly clipped a power line. For the very same reason. Even the jet aircraft, they are not able to withstand kind of the Ukrainian air defenses. They're flying extremely low, and they just and so at that point, when you're going that fast, it's really hard to see a power line. So that's kind of what we're seeing now. That one was an accident, but we also know that it's not entirely saving them either, especially in the more open areas of the Donbass, where there's not a whole lot of nap of the earth flight you can do. Really, you just have to land it and start, taxiing it everywhere if you really wanted to stay out of the way of any anti-aircraft fire. So. But yes, so it's very possible. I haven't seen the video you're talking about, but we have seen an Mi-24 go down very recently in the Zaporizhzhia Oblast. So you guys want to go backtrack and check it out, you can. We aired it here. You jump down here. There's a massive amounts of Russian strikes on settlements. So much like I was talking about earlier, when we're talking about that $104 billion worth of damage. Of course, you saw it with Lysychansk. It's under constant bombardment. Severodonetsk is essentially turning into a Mariupol 2.0 when it comes to bombardment. And here, they listed off a massive amount. So this is coming from the Ukrainian Ministry of Internal Affairs, because they are the ones that coordinate the rescue and response of and the first responders to these incidences. And they said that today, and this is a quote, the army of the Russian occupiers launched airstrikes on Sirotin, Borivsky. The enemy also fired at Melkin, Ustanivka, Mykolivka, Belgorivka, Moronova, Zelote, and Triske with artillery and MLRS, which would have been the BM-21 Grads. And the fire and rescue units of the State Emergency Service extinguished the fire. And that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing them go. This is their official Twitter, and this is some photos that they were taking from these first responders that are out here and running. And while they're out here too, this water, a lot of this region, the entire Luhansk region has lost basically all utilities at this point. Electricity, running water, gas in many places at this point. And that's just because the bombardments have really taken a toll on the civilian infrastructure, and a lot of basic necessities just don't exist. So as we can see here, a lot of people are going to these to the fire engines and pulling water from there so they can eat, drink, whatever, bathe. So that's currently the situation within the Luhansk. I jump down here a little bit. You see the French assistance is being put to good use. This is actually Ukrainian troops using a French Milan anti-tank guided missile. The Milan is basically patterned off kind of across, if I remember correctly, and I'm not an expert in French anti-armor weapons, but if I remember correctly, it's kind of a cross between a TOW and a Javelin. I don't believe it's wire guided. I could be wrong though. Don't quote me. But anyway, they're using it. They're using the Milan, and they're firing it at a Russian armored vehicle with pretty good effect. And of course, this has copyright music as well. Well, let's take a look. So that's the Milan. He locks on there. And fires. And there goes the Russian armor. very short, sweet video. I mean, everyone likes to see that kind of stuff, the combat footage of Ukrainian forces, and everyone likes watching stuff blow up, because I sure do. But yeah, we're seeing that all over the front. We're seeing the Stugna P get used still to an extreme level, because it provides a lot of standoff and relative safety for the crew. The Javelin, even though the stocks are kind of running a little bit low and we're looking for ways to replenish, the Javelin is still seeing good use. The In-Law is still seeing good use. A lot of the RPG variants and the Panzerfaust variants are all getting used pretty heavily. So a lot of anti-armor warfare, and that's just because of Russian doctrine really calls for armored spearheads, and they haven't seemed to change up their doctrine whatsoever, despite it really, in all honesty, failing at this point. We jump down here into Danets, where we have a couple of different things. So first of all, the Topaz plant was shelled by Ukrainian forces today. We've seen shells land near the Topaz plant before. I actually finally geolocated it this time. And the Ukrainian artillery actually struck the plant. Now, the reason for this is because it seems to have been that the Russian forces were either staged inside, because it is a rather large complex, and or using it as an ammunition depot. But shortly after the strikes, the Russian forces were seen leaving in military convoys out from the plant. So it was a valid military target to strike this, and obviously, and it seems to be also a lot of command vehicles as well. So we'll take a look at the strike first.
Прилет.
They dropped it right on target. I mean, right on target. And here we have actually the video taken from someone here in Donetsk of Russian forces actually leaving the facility. So obviously, it was a pretty good call to hit the Topaz plant. But of course, because they're putting military targets in a of course highly populated area, such as the city of Donetsk, of course, Russia has something to say about that, and that's what we see here. This is actually a Russian political analyst, Maria Dubokova. And she retweeted a video from a rocket strike that actually occurred today down by that Topaz plant, and she said, "How should I underscore that this was that was a cluster munition? The Convention on Cluster Munitions, or the CCM, prohibits all use, transfer, production, and stockpiling of cluster bombs. However, the incident does not have audio because it's CCTV footage, of course. So." It's not a cluster munition. Now, I'm going to show you this. This is her Twitter, but we can take a look. There's no audio to this. But there it goes off, and you can see all the sparking and everything. I'll let that come back to you. So, back it up. So, notice what's right here. This is power lines. And the round lands. And all of a sudden you see these power lines that just got severed. They start sparking all over the place. and you can tell by the color that blue and orange flash that happens. See how it starts flashing off in blue? That's an electrical fire. That's an electrical spark. You can see it start whipping over there. So that is the cause. And if you don't believe that, then here is a video of power line sparking.
I got it. Power going out. Go home. Go home. That's it.
So that is your power lines when something seems to go wrong. That's the spark they create, and that's what you're starting to see in that video. When they're severed, they'll do that as well. Also, I want to apologize real quick because apparently there's a lot of fireworks that someone's shooting off. There's a festival ongoing this weekend in my town, so a lot of people are enjoying the fireworks and the nice weather for the weekend. I can't say I blame them, but it's also not. I have a hard time dealing with fireworks in this day and age. Used to love them as a kid. Now that I'm out, I'm not so much. But anyway, going back to it. So if you want to see what a cluster munition's actually like, this is a Russian aircraft from 2016. Specifically, this is from the 22nd of March 2016. This is back during the bombing of Aleppo and Idlib. This is when the Russian and Syrian armed forces together were conducting strikes on Idlib and putting down rebel forces, or at least those rebellious to the cause of the Assad regime, engaging them there. So Russian forces were providing air support. We saw them drop all sorts of things. The thermobaric munitions were used. We've seen them, conduct massive strikes on this. This is also where some of those chemical attacks occurred. But this, of course, after this Russian political analyst so kindly pointed out to us, the Convention on Cluster Munitions prohibits all use, transfer, production, and stockpiling of cluster munitions. Congratulations, Russia has stockpiled cluster munitions. Here you go. So, for those that wonder, so that is the Russian forces using cluster munitions. We know the Russian forces have them. We know that they've used them. That's from 2016. Got one even better though. This is a Russian cluster bomb strike in Kharkiv this year, earlier in the war. Take a look. So this one just has some music over top. So this guy's driving. It looks like his Lada from the Soviet Union. You can see these rounds starting to come in. There they go. Also, that is like the luckiest driver I've ever seen. And you can watch. So they zoom in on this. This is one of the clusters. But you can see, it's not there right now. And all of a sudden, when these explosions start going off, they start dropping. There's one. There's one, and there it goes. It bounces off the truck. And wait for it. Truck leaves. Boom. What is that? That is confirmed use of cluster munitions by the Russian forces this year. This year, in this war. So, please, Maria Dubakova, please tell me again about the Convention on Cluster Munitions and their use in populated areas like Ukraine's second largest city of Kharkiv. Anyway, though, going back to a little bit of good news here, we see more of the Ukrainian Air Force. So they are flying. You could reach out and touch them if you wanted. But this is an attack. These are the Su-25 attack aircraft, also known as a Frogfoot, is their nickname. They're flying extremely low level, and they're actually flying in support of Ukrainian ground forces. They are carrying rocket pods on these, so that way they can conduct a multitude of strikes. They're going to send a lot more munitions than just dropping bombs, and they also can do those high-angle attacks just as much as a helicopter can. So go ahead and take a look.
Красавец! Круто! Air Force Ukraine forever.
If you're a guy on the ground, that's what you want to see. So, pretty cool. Pretty nice low flight level. Ukrainian pilots have shown to be very good pilots. Very good pilots. So, I have pretty good faith that those probably ended up on target. We're actually going to jump up here into the Dnipro Oblast, where we can see over here the Novomoskovsk oil facility was hit by Russian forces. 3 Russian rockets struck the oil facility in the Dnipro Oblast, injuring at least 3 people, all of whom were in the hospital, at least according to the regional military administrator, Valentin Reznichenko. So, you can go ahead and take a look here. So this is the fire coming from that facility. Pretty major strike. Obviously, that's going to put a little bit of a damper on Ukrainian forces, considering they just lost an oil depot. But not to fear, I'm sure they have lost these kind of facilities before, and we've seen that it hasn't at least impacted the war effort in a noticeable way. Now, I hope that this doesn't as well, but I'm sure we'll be able to get some aid from the West regarding that. But up in here, there is Russian shelling. I actually mislabeled this one. So there's actually Russian shelling up here in Kremenchuk. So Russian forces, of course, using pretty long-range artillery systems, actually struck Kremenchuk, and they hit it again. Specifically, what they're hitting is the heating and power plant in the city. So this is knocking out their power and their water heat and everything else. So once again, major infrastructure, major civilian infrastructure that's going to knock out more necessities within the region. It was already undergoing repair from the previous strike, and they hit it again, leaving pretty extensive damage, at least according to Anna Ackerman, who actually runs an environmental NGO there in Kyiv. So take a look at this as well. And that is the photo from one of her colleagues out there in the field from these strikes. As we jump down here, TASS actually gave us some news. The TASS news agency, which is the Russian state-affiliated news agency. And here's the reason why. There's some partisan activity ongoing in Kherson. We already knew that, but most of the time we see it on message boards that we have as sources. And the thing here is that through the Russians, we can actually get some glimpses as to what's happening inside of the occupied territories of Ukraine. Now, it's not going to be heavily reported, of course. A lot of information is pretty censored, but whenever there's a terror attack is what they'll be calling it, you're going to see that what it is, it's partisan activity in areas such as Melitopol and Kherson. So here, Russian media, so what they're saying is that a bomb went off inside the car of Yevgeny Sobolev, who is the head of the Kherson Penal Service. So basically, he's in charge of the police. And he was not killed, but he was hospitalized with non-lethal injuries, at least according to them. Undoubtedly, this is obviously the work of the partisans. We've seen the partisans sabotage communication networks and supply networks. We've seen them conduct attacks against Russian forces, reportedly killing a pretty significant number of them that were here providing security. And we've also seen them also target basically conspirators with the Russians, those that are cooperating with Russian forces, and especially those that are working within the occupational government, as Mr. Sobolev was doing. So, and of course, this is actually coming all from TASS News. Once again, TASS News is a Russian media, is a Russian news agency. So, yeah, pretty short article here, but apparently this occurred today. So, there we have a little bit of a glimpse into what's going on in the Kherson Oblast. But up here, just across the border in the Mykolaiv Oblast, Zelensky actually visited the front lines near Mykolaiv. So President Zelensky basically went to a bunch of forward command centers here within the Mykolaiv Oblast here, where Ukrainian army is currently trying to conduct a counteroffensive. So far, they've had some pretty good success in the last couple of pushes that they have done. That we've been able to report on in anyway. And here also, while he was up here overseeing the situation on the ground, he also awarded several members of the Ukrainian army awards for courage and gallantry in combat. So obviously giving out the awards just like any other military does, but also Zelensky is very well known for this. Zelensky is known as the president that keeps fatigues in his office, because even before the war occurred, he was going to the front lines, visiting the trenches, and really talking to the battlefield commanders. What do you need? What can we do to improve? What's the situation? He's a very hands-on president, and so we're still seeing that throughout the war. The early part of the war, the first about 3 months, he really wasn't able to. I mean, they were really trying to kill him, and they really were not succeeding. Much like they aren't really succeeding all that well in the invasion in its totality. But now it's a little bit safer for him to kind of move a little bit more freely, and so he's able to kind of go back to what he's used to doing and being able to actually see the situation on the ground. It's very difficult to sit there and be an armchair general, and he's not one to try and do that. He has a war to coordinate, and a war and coordination like that means you need to go to the front lines and actually know what's going on for yourself, and not just what you're hearing through the 6 guys it has to run through before it gets to you. So, you can take a look here. So, obviously, presenting awards. A nice big boost to morale. And then, of course, he's taking pictures. I mean, why wouldn't you? I mean, come on. I mean, I would take pictures with President Zelensky any day of the week. So, pretty good news. Pretty good news coming out of there. But that's actually it for inside Ukraine. But we do have a lot of news coming out from outside of Ukraine as well. And some of it does have to deal with the war going on there. So, the first thing we're actually going to jump over to here is in Russia. This is in Uratusk. And this is more... We see more stuff coming via rail from the Far East going to Ukraine. So, the ongoing... I'm sorry if you guys can hear this. They are just... It sounds like a war zone out there, and I'm starting to get... My Agent Orange is acting up. Anyway, the Russian... Anyway, so this is a Russian train. There's a Russian train carrying T-62s and T-80s coming here from Irkutsk, which is the Far East. So they're really, really pulling their stockpiles. And they're pulling them from every part of the country. They're even pulling it from other commands. We're pretty safe to assume that they're pulling stuff from the Southern Command as well, which is currently operating in Syria and also Africa as well. And this is just because they're taking staggering losses in materials. And when I say materials, I mean vehicles. I'm talking ammunition. I'm talking weapons, equipment, but also manpower. They are really struggling with manpower. It's a 1-to-1 parity. They're on the front lines, and they're trying to pull everything they can, but they are losing so much of their equipment. Whenever you're hearing, oh, they're waiting, they have their good stuff in reserve. No, they don't. No, they don't. They have the best stuff they have there. If you're talking about the T-14, it's a big pile of a wasted time and budget. I want to tell you that right here, right now, with as little as the U.S. knowledge has on the T-14, I can tell you it's a giant waste of a budget. Because the T-14 Armada is an absolutely terrible tank. Terrible tank. First of all, it maintains the autoloader design, which is why there's currently a turret turret tossing contest in Ukraine right now. Secondly, the crew compartment, while it may seem kind of cool, it's also extremely compact, and it's very difficult for your actual, tank commander to do his job. That's why tanks, since World War II, their design hasn't changed a whole lot, because you try and come up with a better design than the whole Second World War came up with, that put tank commanders in the turret of the tank, and the gunners and the loaders and everything else that you need. There's a reason tanks are set up the way they are. And that single crew compartment in the forward under the upper glacis is not going to be where it's at. Optics and sensors don't work when there's a Molotov cocktail that's on fire and destroying them. Electronics fail. And also the engine doesn't seem to be powerful enough in T-14. So it's constantly breaking down. It does not have great subversion. It does not operate over good terrain. It is limited in its quantity. They don't have enough money to produce more. So if that's what you're talking about, their best stuff is in reserve, you're completely wrong on that. Secondly, we've seen the T-90s and the T-80s, which we know are somewhat reliable, destroyed in rapid succession. That's their newest stuff. The T-90 is really their newest combat-proven equipment. The T-72, the most fielded tank that they have, in multiple different variants, might I add, also rather inadequate. We knew it was inadequate during the first Gulf War, where it was destroyed. The Battle 73 Easting, basically the entire Iraqi army was T-72s. It's outranged. Autoloaders sound like a good idea coming from Rooster Sideburn. Autoloaders are a terrible idea. They are a terrible, terrible idea. Because the thing that with an autoloader is, that means that like 22 rounds of ammunition are exposed in the bottom part of your turret. And exposed ammunition means that if your tank gets hit with a tandem warhead or a sabot round or anything like that, that's going to set off that ammunition. And there's no amount of blast doors that are going to save you from 22 rounds of your own heat, your own high explosive anti-tank rounds, or your AFSDS, from going off and killing everyone inside the tank. One tank shell's bad enough. One missile is bad enough. Now everything inside of the armor going off is terrible. So that's why it's not very good. That's why you're seeing 9-ton turrets getting thrown in the air like a rag doll. So it does sound like a great idea. In fact, the autoloader for the T-90 can fire up to 9 rounds a minute. There's another cool thing. There's several cool things about the T-90s that make them rather effective for what their purpose is supposed to be. But what looks good on paper versus what it is in reality are very two separate things. And the Russians are learning that the hard way. The T-90 is that way because it's made for the open steppe. Their doctrine is made for the open steppe against NATO. It's not meant to be fighting like it is now in some weird screwed up Russian doctrine versus mixed together with the 21st century warfare that they saw and decided to scribble down on a sticky note from when the U.S. invaded Iraq and Afghanistan and toppled governments in about 3 days. That's what they're doing, and they suck at it. They really suck at combined arms too in supporting efforts. But they're pulling T-62s and T-80s from these. The thing about the T-62 is it's not. It shouldn't. It should be in a museum. It shouldn't be on the front lines. But at this point, Russia's looking at a tank and going, "Yeah, that's a tank." They'll be pulling T-34s and T-26s in no time, guys. I promise you. A good idea for the Russian military. Yes, yes, it is. But anyway, so let's take a look at this. And it's a massive amount of equipment they're pulling too.
Я дежурный 9670 по 4 входному остановился, закрепился на 5160 пике 9. Че, надолго?
There's only 2 iterations of tanks now before they start pulling stuff from World War II. And the only 2 other iterations should be pretty much all but destroyed or sitting in a museum right now. And those are the T-55 and the T-54. Same tank, except the T-55 had a bore evacuator screwed onto the tip. And that's that little weird, if I can find a good, yeah. So right here you can see where the barrel thickens. It's called a bore evacuator. And what that does is it clears out excess gases left over after you fire a round from the tank's bore, so that way it's safe to fire another round. The longer the barrel, you'll see a lot more tanks have them. You won't see World War II tanks necessarily have them, but that's because that's why there's a little bit longer of a time between firing, even when it comes to U.S. tanks, which still require a nice, strong 19-year-old kid with a good arm to load the cannon, to load the actual tank gun. In a way that you can identify something that's NATO versus not NATO, generally speaking, the non-NATO vehicles, such as the Russians and the Chinese, the bore evacuator on the tank is perfectly around the barrel. It's a concentric bore evacuator. Perfectly around the barrel. That's how you can shut that. That's one way. And also, it's going to be either center or forward of center on the barrel. The NATO vehicles usually use a non-concentric bore evacuator that sits towards the rear of the barrel, and that means that it's closer to the turret itself in location on the barrel, but it's also canted off to one side of the barrel, so you'll see kind of a bulge kind of move into one area. So if you look at the barrel of an Abrams tank, you'll see what I'm talking about. It's a lot more obvious if you're looking head on into kind of down to the tank's muzzle. So a little bit of armor ID for y'all there. We jump over here, and it seems that there's been an impact. So we showed this photo, I believe it was actually 2 days ago on the 16th. And this right here is Chancellor Schultz in Bucha. They went and they visited Bucha, where they're currently having ongoing international investigations under the ICC regarding war crimes committed there. And while a lot of Bucha has been cleared up, they still have to conduct that investigation, and they have to exhume, and they have to, go through and actually collect evidence and everything and send it to the ICC. And they went there. And once again, you can make all the speeches you like and talk about support, but what's going on behind closed doors and what's being said in public are two different things. What you can't do is you can't hide the expression on your face when a cameraman snaps a picture of you unknowingly. And we said, and we were saying, this is probably going to have an impact. Seeing this firsthand for yourself, not on the news, not through photographs, but going there and seeing this is going to have a deep emotional impact and really rock you to where you're probably going to have a change in ideology. We've been very frustrated with Russia. Well, of course Russia, but we've been very frustrated with Germany too. Because Germany has been really limited in giving its aid. Even though it's promised a lot, it hasn't really gone through, and they've really delayed a lot. Well, it's 2 days now later, and that seems to have shifted. This is the German Bundeswehr, who's the German army, and this is them getting ready to head to Ukraine. This is some of the supplies that they have promised to be giving Ukraine, and we can see them transporting it here. Of course, it has music attached to it. But you can see the Bundeswehr cross on there. So, yeah, something has changed. Something has had a major change, because this is a lot of vehicles. A lot of vehicles. So, hopefully that's the first step in a long line of, actually, now I understand. And I think probably meeting face to face and having some of those probably heart to heart talks behind closed doors about how you feel and why you feel the way you do. I really hope that played a big part of it, but I think Bucha probably played a pretty big part too, because you can look at whatever channel you like regarding combat footage and all that stuff, and it's never going to really make you understand until you see it for yourself. And that's when you see it for yourself, you have a very hard time trying to internalize and really process the gravity of what you're seeing. It's a very hard internal conflict with yourself, and just seeing it really kind of goes against your beliefs. So I'm sure that probably rocked them all to their core. Jump over here to London. Then there's currently strikes ongoing in London amid rising costs of living. So right now, the inflation rate in the country will reach 11% by autumn. In many areas, the wage increases are only going up between 3 and 4%. So trade union associates promised to organize some rather large-scale strikes because the rising cost of everyday expenses, it just keeps going up. And they're currently calling for the government to help. So pretty big deal. This is some of the impacts we're seeing on sanctions. Unfortunately, yes, when it comes to sanctions, it impacts you too. It impacts you, it impacts me, it impacts everybody. And while it is to target and decrease the ability of Russia to continue to wage war, the unfortunate result of that is, unfortunately, we are going to have to suffer through it too. Now, granted, we're not suffering nearly as much as your average everyday Ukrainian who's currently, their house is gone, their family is dead, and there currently is a war going on. You're being shelled every 3 minutes. But life is not necessarily good in a lot of other parts of the world where we're used to having these kind of comforts. We're used to having, a lot of us, if you're watching this, you live probably in a first world nation somewhere where you have relatively easy internet access. And you aren't really too worried about where your food's probably going to be coming from, although there are some food insecurities even within some first world nations. But in general speaking, overall, you live a relatively normal life. In fact, if you own a car, your family is actually more well off than 80% of the world population. Most people in the world, actually, most third world countries, live in under $2 a day. So that's so you're probably doing relatively well. So that's kind of, while I understand the strikes and I understand the cost of living, because trust me, I would really like to get a house. And I feel it every time I go fill up my vehicle, because I have, kind of a gas guzzler, and I feel it every time I go to the store to get food. I mean, trust me, I feel it. I see the prices go up. But what cost me $150 to feed myself and my family, it now goes now doesn't go nearly as far. That's a quick trip to the store to get some basics you need. So I understand this, but I also understand why it has to happen. Now, are there things that could be done, I think, better? In my personal opinion, yes, but I think the overall kind of small suffering I have to do overall is probably worth it. And that's my personal opinion. So as we jump down here, actually, as we just got done talking about the bombing of Aleppo, there's some pro-Turkish infighting right now in the northern part of Aleppo as we move down here into the Middle East. So these are new battles between the pro-Turkish militants from Arar Asham and Jabhat Shamia, who have taken on a rather large-scale conflict between these two groups that are really on the same side. And they're using armored vehicles, artillery all across northern Aleppo. Dozens are reportedly killed and wounded on both sides. And currently several of them were captured, including one of the al-Sham's commanders, Abu Dujana al-Kurdi. Let me take a look here. This is what I call a technical. This is like a 1990 Toyota Hilux. The ultimate militant vehicle in the Middle East with a ZSU anti-aircraft gun. A ZSU is it's a ZSU 23 TAC 2. It's a twin-mounted 23mm autocannon mounted on the bed of this truck. Oh man, this brings back some memories, guys. This is like the ultimate going and cowabungying it through the desert kind of thing right here. Oh man, it brings back some memories. But yes. Yeah. This is in case you're wondering, no, it is not very effective. Jump down here into Israel, where it's a little bit less of a laughing matter, because the IDF did conduct some airstrikes against the Gaza Strip. Reportedly, this is in retaliation for some rocket strikes that were ongoing, and they targeted some workshops of production of weapons and several observation posts. So this is usually against Hamas, which is what this is. And according to the Israeli side, there was a rocket attack in Ashkelon where no one has yet claimed responsibility. They believe it was Hamas. But this isn't the first time we've seen airstrikes in the Gaza Strip. But we can take a look at this one here. So pretty significant airstrikes ongoing there. The Gaza Strip's a rather highly populated area too, which is kind of the concerning part there. As we jump over into Iraq, we have several different things that occurred. So if you jump down here over into the Diyala government, we can see that there's a large agricultural fire that happened in the Canaan district. And the issue with this, amongst many things, of course, is the fact that the Tigris River is basically dried up. And the Diyala government is one of the few major agricultural areas within Iraq. And because of this, they're already going through with a drought that's already causing losses to a lot of their fields. So you're not going to be looking at such a large harvest. This is causing some major concerns for famine inside of Iraq on top of the drought at this point. In fact, some regions are reporting at least one-third of their crops have actually died as a result of the ongoing drought. And we've also seen the Islamic State burn fields that aren't so far suffering at this point. So that it's only going to further this. And then, of course, fires that spread naturally or unnaturally are also going to cause a lot of harm to this as well. So you're just seeing complete and total devastation of the Iraqi agriculture right now, and that's going to cause a lot of issues here later, because really there isn't enough humanitarian supplies to really assist Iraq in any major capacity. And also the security situation in Iraq also doesn't allow for a lot of assistance in a way that we would do elsewhere. We jump up here into Kirkuk. There's a pretty massive fuel protests right now, and that's because they are having fuel shortages there in the city of Kirkuk. Currently, they're blocking several streets and they're burning tires. We really don't have much more information other than that at this point, but we have seen a lot of protests in Iraq over the last few weeks. As we're jumping over here, just down the street, we can see here in Shamshamal, they're protesting a lack of basic necessities. They're lacking electricity and a water supply. So obviously the drought is impacting that water supply as well, considering their water would be coming from the Tigris River, which is over here. So that's kind of what part of the issue there. But electricity, Iraq's a poor nation relatively, and they aren't able to supply a whole lot outside of Baghdad. A lot of these are still pretty simple living conditions, I would say. I mean, they're better than places in Afghanistan, such as up in Kandahar, but they're not the most developed parts of the world. So there's still a lot of issues when it comes to actually helping people with that. But we can take a look at this. So obviously protests of pretty basic necessities right now. So we'll see how that further develops as the protests continue across the country. As we jump up here, up by Mosul, we can actually see here, this is within the Bashika province, or the Bashika district of the Mosul region. And rockets were actually fired at Turkish forces here in northern Iraq. So the Turkish forces have been conducting operations within northern Iraq, specifically against the PKK and the Kurdish forces up there in this region. And as on the night of June the 17th and early this morning of the 18th, unidentified persons fired 5 rockets in the directions of the location of the Turkish armed forces. According to preliminary data, casualties and destruction in the military facility was avoided. So they did not hit their intended target, which is not uncommon for the first attempt on a strike. But who is behind the attack is unknown. It's very possible it could be Kurdish forces such as the PKK. This is primarily Iraqi Kurdistan within this region. But it's also completely possible to be any of the other groups, including the Islamic State, which we know is still rather active. You also have a resistance over there in Sinjar as well, that may or may not be too happy against anybody else encouraging that is conducting an incursion within this area. Khatib Hezbollah, which is an Iranian-backed force, would also be a contender as well. So there's no real way to be able to tell who conducted these strikes, other than the fact that it just happened. So you can see here is some of these rocket tubes. This is basically what's left after the strike. Believe it or not, when you're having these rockets, these are Katyusha rockets, from what it appears to be. There's a pretty decent amount of left over after a rocket detonates, believe it or not. We used to pick up entire tube casings just like this. They're actually pretty large in some cases when we were at the Baghdad embassy. So, but after they would shoot at us, we'd get all these big ass rocket tubes, and I remember one time an EOD guy came in with one, and he just sat it on the table. He was like, "Hey, can you watch this?" I was like, I guess. We were just getting shelled 5 minutes ago, but if you want me to watch this, I guess I can. But yeah, that's the thing. That's the situation ongoing here in Iraq. As we jump over here in Kabul, The Islamic State actually attacked Kabul today. They conducted an attack in the 4th District, and this is against a Sikh temple, so an Indian Sikh temple. And they reportedly used hand grenades, a car bomb. But this was in retaliation against the temple and the shrine for Hindus and Sikhs in response to insults against the Prophet Muhammad there in India. So India is having a lot of contention between the minority Muslim population and the majority Hindu population. And as a result, that's filtered over. Al-Qaeda has made a statement saying that if it continues, that they will indeed begin terror attacks in India. And now the Islamic State is apparently, of course, conducting attacks against Hindus and Sikhs as a result here in Afghanistan. And what's ongoing is one of the terrorists, Mohammed Tajiki, actually stormed into the building and killing and injuring 31 people according from the guards, the Taliban, and the worshippers who were there, and also confirmed by local sources. The Taliban officially announced, though, only 3 dead and 7 wounded. So they fought for 3 hours with the Taliban, and they set off 4 IEDs and a car bomb, so also a VBID IED, killing and wounding an additional 20 security officials. The Indian Forest Ministry said in the first hours after the start of the attack, they reported that they were closely monitoring the situation, and later the Taliban tried to make amends with their statements. But the Islamic State has announced in advance that their intention to attack the Hindus, and the Taliban would not be able to provide them with security. So, pretty ominous message there. But you can see there's not much left of the car. That was filled with a ton of HME. And the inside of the building. So unfortunately, a pretty decent amount of stuff going on there. As you jump up here into the northern part of Afghanistan, the Taliban commander actually joined the resistance in Baghlan province. So here in Baghlan, when the Taliban commander Abdullah Asifi abandoned his brothers, aka the Taliban, to join the militias. He justified his defection by saying the Taliban are unjust and oppressed people.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. این جانب فرمانده از زلاسفی از حوزه میان شهر ورسوالی های خوست و فرینگ همکار با امارات بدیم. امارات بسیار ظلم و ستم بری ملت غریب و بیچاره میکردن. امیدوار ما قبول نکردن.
So obviously that's not a good look for the Taliban, who are currently in control of Afghanistan. You jump over here into Shanghai real quick. There's a pretty powerful explosion here at an oil plant in Shanghai. This is one of the largest oil refineries in the country, and local residents were divided into 2 groups. There is at least 1 person dead and 1 injured. So pretty massive situation they got going on there in China. And as we jump down here into Africa, we have one small thing here in Botswana. So Botswana troops are actually being trained by the French because they're getting ready to deploy over to the Cabo Delgado province of Mozambique, where there's been a lot of violence by the Islamic State, who are actually closing in on the regional capital of Pemba. And right now, they're currently training these personnel to be able to conduct counterterrorism operations effectively against the Islamic State and other militant groups within the region. So France, with a lot of this region being former colonies of the French Empire, prior to its collapse after World War II, they still keep relatively good relations. They feel it's kind of their need to support these regions after they kind of screwed them over for the most part, and they continue to do so. In fact, Mali, who was just taken over by a military junta not too long ago, just severed all ties with the French, who were assisting Mali in a military operation that required them to divert emergency forces into the region in order to help them take back control of the country from militants. And promptly after that, they were basically cut off. The French, the Germans, and many other nations, including a coalition of African countries, are actually conducting peacekeeping missions throughout the continent at this point. And there's a pretty high level of violence within the country based off of just militant groups. Of course, you have issues between the countries themselves, but also there's a high level amount of terrorism. You have Al-Shabaab, which is a branch of Al-Qaeda operating here. You have Boko Haram, which is pretty prominent. Many different warlords and factions, but of course you also have the Islamic State. In fact, in Morocco, they stated that that Africa was actually going to be the new forefront of the fight against the Islamic State. It is now shifted from the Middle East, while it may be still prominent, but Africa is now the main focus against the fight against the Islamic State, and that's what we're seeing here. Now, as we jump over into North America, we actually jump down here into Tucson. So what this is the Boneyard, also known as Davis-Monthan Tucson Air Force Base. Now, the Boneyard is pretty famous because this is where the U.S. stores a lot of aircraft. I mean, you have C-130 Hercules here. I'm trying to find it. You have F-18s. These are training aircraft, helicopters. I was trying to find, I think they might be up here. Yes, these things right here, these are called B-57s, and they were fighter bombers that were developed in 1952. There's still F-4 Phantoms laying around here somewhere that I spotted, and I couldn't believe it. But this is also where they stored the Mi-17 helicopters, and the United States is now shipping those. So they have retrofitted them, they've inspected, repaired, made sure they're still capable of flying. They've conducted repairs to them and refit the aircraft, and now they are being shipped off over from Davis-Monthan Air Force Base over to Ukraine. So that's currently what's going on. You can see a pretty decent amount of them there. The U.S. doesn't have a lot of stockpiles of Soviet aircraft. They really don't. So what they can give, they're going to. So they have the rotor blades and spare parts already in here, so that way they can get everything over to Ukraine in the best condition possible. Continue jumping down here. I mean, they're loading them into aircraft. The U.S. has this capability, yes. It's a lot easier. It's a lot easier to just fly it there in a big plane than it is to actually fly it there yourself. But they are getting ready to go, so those will hopefully very soon be in the hands of the Ukrainian Air Force being put to good use. Up here in New York, as we start getting into the good part of the news here, Warren Buffett raised $19 million for charity. The charity is called Glide. It's a charity that helps poor, homeless, and the poor and homeless, and also drug addicts. But he had a bid to have a private lunch with him, where an anonymous bidder won it by $19 million. He bid $19 million. This is a new record breaker for this. So Warren Buffett is a 91-year-old billionaire. So he's a pretty famous guy. He's pretty famous within the economic areas. He has a lot of commentary on economics. He's also big on the stock market. A lot of people really pay close attention to what he says because he's been pretty accurate thus far. But so the bid on eBay started at just $25,000. But this is pretty big. So he's been doing this. He's been bidding on the right to dine with him since 2000. So really good cause, I think, to raise money for charity and get to hang out with a billionaire for lunch one day. So they'll be at a private steakhouse there in New York City. So pretty crazy. And that's Warren Buffett. for anyone that doesn't know. Yeah, he's Warren Buffett's got himself a nice chunk of change, that's for sure. He's pretty. I would just like to have a small fraction of it, por favor. I just want a house, man. Anyway, this is over in Rotterdam, and aquatic drones are being developed by Rand Marine for a company or for the environment, and it's called the Waste Sharks, and they collect floating pollution, so plastic, algae, and biomass from lakes and ponds, and the 1.5 meter drone can hold 160 liters of garbage. That's amazing. So let's take a look.
So we wanted it to be as easy to deploy as possible, as easy to capture the trash and bring it back to land, make it safer so that the operator stood on the shore rather than was in the water, make it battery operated so it was zero emissions, not diesel or fossil fuel powered.
Whale shark is based on the whale shark, which has a large mouth for capturing its prey. So that's why we have 2 pontoons, one on each side, so that the waste can come in from the front and it gets trapped in between the pontoons.
Very hard to collect because it does break down, and so it gets smaller and smaller, and that's just hard to get out to our big open oceans and collect the trash there. We'd much rather collect that trash closer to shore, where it's just easier, it's less costly.
So cool thing coming from your own nose. So pretty cool to see that. Yeah, I mean, the environment's extremely important. Obviously, we see the effects of it here on the channel every day. When we're talking about Africa, we're talking about Iraq and Afghanistan. We're talking about severe droughts that are ongoing throughout the world, global famine, rising conflicts over natural resources. We're seeing all sorts of this kind of stuff, and unfortunately, it affects millions of people throughout the world. And so, as we're wrapping up the news here tonight, please make sure to check out the description below. And we'll be able, and down there, being an awesome community, of course, that you guys have been able to put together here, we'll be able to actually do some really good here in the world and help the people that are being really heavily affected by this at this point in time, as we're trying to look for these environmental solutions going forward. But not just environmental solutions. If you want, you can support the war in Ukraine ongoing. We have plenty there for you. If you want to support what's going on in Ethiopia and Somalia because of the ongoing droughts and the lack of humanitarian aid, having the rations cut lately, you can do that. We're always looking for more. Southeast Asia as well got hit with Super Typhoon Rai, which we have a donation link down there for that as well. If you have any more, please let us know on our Discord. Our link's also in the description as well. Let a staff member know the charity that you would like us to take a look at, and we'll go through and we'll get that validated if we can, and we can go ahead and get that vetted, and as long as it meets our criteria to end up here on the channel. And if you can't give a lot to these organizations, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, I 100% understand. Give us a like and subscribe. Let your friends know about us because it helps us reach more people. And the more people that come here, one, they get to enjoy the way that we do the news. It's a little bit different. It's an independent source. You don't have to listen to the entertainment theater that other news actually puts on, so that I have a distaste for. And also, the more people that are here, most importantly, the more people that can help us raise money for these causes. They can help us help other people throughout the world and really, quite literally, feed starving people in Africa who just had their rations cut by 50%. Literally help people that are affected by global warming, that are affected by environmental disasters, that are affected by conflicts and wars. I can't think of any other better reason to be doing this project, and I really hope that you guys will join us as we continue going forth with this endeavor and really give us that support. I really think the support you guys have already given us and continue to show. I really do hope that you enjoy this and that you guys keep coming back every night. So I want to thank the staff. They're the ones that really put this together. They're the researchers that do this. and the translator and everything else that we got. They put so much time and effort into this, and I really just lend my voice. So make sure to give them a hand as well. They have done an amazing job so far as we've continued on here. And with that, I hope that you guys will be back to join us again tomorrow. So with that, my name is Paul from the New News. I hope that you remain safe, that your family and friends remain safe, and that you guys have a wonderful Sunday, and that you guys get to enjoy and relax a little bit. And with that, I will talk to you guys again tomorrow night at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, 9 p.m. Central. Other than that, have a great night, everybody, and bye now.